Welcome to Sib Spot. Today's Reddit stories are from MaliciousCompliance. Story 1 today is by No Recording 6287. Know how much you can lift. Back in high school during my freshman year, I was on the football team. For my high school, if you were on the football team, you were required to have one weightlifting class, fall semester, per year, since the weightlifting coach was the football coach and he could put you on a specialized training separate from the other students in the class. I normally train with one of my DE, defensive ed buddies, since we lifted relatively close to each other, so most workouts we wouldn't have to change the weights after each set, and we could take a reasonable break between sets. One guy on the team, a backup CB, cornerback, was usually way too cocky for his own good, always trying to show up his teammates. It's also important to note that he was about 50 pounds lighter than us and didn't do hardly any lifting. One day, me and DE were going for our 1-rep max squats. I think at the time we had about 255 on the bar. CB walked over with a smug look on his face that had "I'm better than you" written all over it. He told us it looked easy and he could lift it with no sweat. We told him it's definitely heavier than anything we've seen him lift. His confidence didn't falter though. He doubled down on his stance. Then he says to let him get one in. I look to DE. DE looks to me. Okay, fine. Go ahead. Do you want spotters? Nah, this is easy. I don't need your help. I look at DE. DE looks at me. We took a step back and watched. To his credit, he was at least able to get it up off the hooks onto his shoulders. His legs were shaking though. He was clearly struggling. But he very clearly said he could do it and didn't want any help, so we didn't help him. CB squat, and he didn't get back up. If there weren't guards to save him, he definitely would have been stuck there for a bit, because DE and I were fully ready to not help him at all. CB walked away embarrassed, and Coach, who was apparently behind us when this whole thing happened, just laughed and told us, well, funny, to not do that again. Coach referenced that moment several times during the season, and thankfully CB was a good sport about it. We were cool for the rest of the season. Edit to clarify, Coach made it an unbreakable rule, so no matter if you had spotters or not, you would always squat with bumper safeties under you. So when he squatted and got himself stuck, all he had to do was let go of the bar and roll forward. No need to wait for someone to help you, especially since the weight could be really heavy. Highest max I saw was 415, and many people only had one partner instead of two. I'm honestly glad that the coach told you not to let that sort of thing happen again. He really could have hurt himself, even if he's a jerk. Muscles do have their limits, and he could have torn something or injured himself really badly. This is reminding me of a YouTube series that I watch on occasion. There's this champion weightlifter named Anatoly that does a YouTube video, and he is this super thin, kind of scrawny looking guy. He's got muscles, but he's not stacked, and he'll go to the gym and kind of dress himself up and put costumes on, and he tells the people there that he's just a worker, or he just always wanted to try that, and he asks if he can try it, and these big, super buff guys with giant muscles are like looking at him like he's crazy, and then he can outlift any of them, and he lifts it like it's nothing, sometimes with one hand over his head, and pranks always kind of make me feel bad for the people involved because they're being interrupted what they're doing. But he is a pretty impressive weightlifter, that's for sure. Our next story today is by Without Dennis Nedry. How my friend got paid to find creative ways to sleep for 19 months. I posted this as a comment on another sub and someone DM'd me, said y'all would like to hear the story. I hope it fits here. I have a good friend who miraculously complied her way into getting paid for essentially doing absolutely nothing for 19 months. It was a government job, no surprise there. She and her colleague had worked in a state office that kept track of plague cases among prairie dog towns. They were super busy trapping and testing all summer, but once winter comes, prairie dogs hibernate, so they ran out of work. They told their boss via email that there was no more to do for the season that first autumn, and their boss responded by telling them to stand by for reassignment. So they did, for months. They didn't want to be accused of theft by clocking in and out and leaving, so in the very beginning, they organized some storage spaces very slowly, cleaned their office several times, organized paperwork and that sort of thing. When they ran out of stuff to do, they started sleeping, doing schoolwork, Sudoku, what have you. Initially, they slept in turns, so someone was always available if anyone came to check on them, but when it became obvious no one was coming, they stopped bothering. By summer the following year, when the prairie dogs came out of hibernation and she thought her work might resume, the whole office, all employees in every department, received an email from someone high up informing everyone that that particular department had been cut. Don't know if it was unfunded, or they got all the data necessary the previous summer, or that particular pet project of some politician was forgotten about, but somewhere along the line, the State Fish and Game axed the project, for whatever reason. Nothing was mentioned in the email about her job status, so her and her coworker continued to go in and do nothing. She'd tell me about making a giant binder rubber band chain and roping 2 office chairs together facing each other to sleep in the seats. She's only about 5 feet tall, so she fit relatively well. Making a nest under her desk and moving the largest copy machine out of its cabinet and sleeping inside. They made sure the security people saw them periodically through the day, and they were on the camera. Anyone above them paying attention would have noticed, but no one ever took the time. They dodged folks in the other departments for fear they'd get told on and just minded their own business. They rarely had much interaction with other employees anyway. Eventually, she ran into her boss at a show and she asked my friend where she had found new work. My friend didn't lie and said she still worked there. Where? Where you left them. She said you should have seen her face when the lady put the pieces together and realized what was going on. The jig was up, and she and her colleague were let go that following morning via email before they went in. Because they had technically worked there for so long, I think 2 years was the threshold, they both got a little severance package. In case you're wondering, they got to keep their pay since 1, they had proof they informed their boss they had no work, and she clearly saw the email and responded. 2, they still showed up. 3, they did exactly what they were told, and 4, it wasn't their job to make sure they actually had work to do. They both qualified for unemployment, to boot. Neither of them used the unemployment since they had both been feeling like the gravy train was sure to derail any day, so they had new jobs lined up. Edited to add, thank you for all your stories. I had no idea it was so common to misplace employees that continue to get paid. Y'all are opening my eyes. Keep 'em coming. The quote from Independence Day comes to mind as I read your comments. Quote, you didn't actually think they spent $10,000 for a hammer, $30,000 for a toilet seat, did you? Quote. It's not Area 51 all that money's going to. It's forgotten and redundant government employees. Edit strikes back. I got my friend's permission to tell her story, of course, and she asked me to include some more things that they did with their time while standing by. She doesn't do Reddit. One autumn, she and her colleague decorated the shared nap hiding spot, a walk-in storage closet with miniature Halloween decorations, and then reenacted scenes from Hocus Pocus. She spent a whole lot of time editing Wikipedia for grammar. She learned to knit, then she learned she doesn't like knitting. Her colleague downloaded plans from the internet on how to make a personal flying device, think jetpack, and tried to make it with office supplies at 1/16 the scale. They knew it wouldn't fly, they just wanted to see if they could build what it would look like. During Christmas, they wrote all new jingles about how bored they were. There were 14 completed songs in total, and they recorded them on little mini tape recorder she still has. Her colleague went to night school. Evening school, really, and did his homework during the day. By the time they were finally let go, he was just shy of becoming a paralegal. He did finish school and went pretty much straight into a job all these years later. He's now a real estate attorney. Good for him. We invented Uber and Lyft. That is, they worked out a solid plan for a non-taxi riding service that would be based on ordering a car via the internet. This was before smartphones. She wrote a bunch of serial killers in prison and told them how disappointed she was in them. She never received a reply. Most of the people that replied in the comments down below shared their own stories of how they just got forgotten and they could do whatever they wanted at work. If there's not a manager that's constantly breathing down your neck, you can be forgotten and you may not have any work to do. But man, if any of you have ever been at work on a really slow day and you don't have the chance to sleep, it can be a super exhausting thing. That's why in certain organizations, if they really don't like an employee, they'll find the most boring, mundane task for them to do in hopes that they want to quit because their work is driving them crazy. I saw that in a YouTube video recently where a guy was talking about how job security is no longer a guarantee and people don't care. If an employer really doesn't like you, they'll put you in like a windowless office and have you do like stapling papers all day. And that's going to make most people want to quit their jobs. But if there's a job where you're allowed to sleep all day, people are all about that job. Where can I sign up? How can I fall through the cracks and be put into that kind of role? Where they just forget about you, you're still getting paid, and you're sleeping. Our next story today is by Petite Peach Pep. I should talk to HR about leave if I'm legitimately having trouble at work 1 week before my due date? Sure thing, boss. This happened last year. I, female 31, was 1 week away from my due date and was working full-time in a school administration position. At this time, I had the capability to work from home if needed. For example, too sick to come into work, catch up on extra work, unable to secure a daycare for my child, etc. When I accepted the position prior to my pregnancy, I was told by my boss, let's call her Ronnie, that it was very flexible as long as I got my hours in. I very rarely worked from home and typically only did so for an hour or two in the morning if it was needed later on in order to work before OB/GYN appointments, as it was a long commute between work and home and doctor's office. However, I was told by Ronnie after accepting the position to try to limit working from home to 2 days a month, which, fine, at this point I was well under since I was only working an hour or two maybe twice a month, and only once a month before that. Being so close to my due date, I was experiencing physical hardships that made working on site more and more difficult, such as dizzy spells, a pulled tendon in my foot, and severe back pain. I was also scared of potentially going into labor while at work with it being so far away from the hospital my OB/GYN delivers at. To top it all off, my coworkers started asking more invasive questions about my pregnancy that made me uncomfortable. All in all, it was not a fun time. I explained all of this in an email to Ronnie and asked her permission to almost exclusively work from home up until I go into labor. I said I thought it would be a reasonable accommodation and I work really well from home. Ronnie responded a couple days later denying my request to work from home at all and said I needed to be there since we would be starting some of our busiest work in a couple of months, which I would be gone for on maternity leave anyway, so I'm not sure why she brought it up. But I could talk to HR about leave options if I truly am having trouble working. By the way, it is illegal in my state to require an employee to take leave if there is reasonable accommodation that can be made instead. I immediately went to HR and did just that. We talked about options and found out I could start my leave the very next day and still be paid the mandatory leave pay for the extra time. I informed Ronnie that I would be out starting the next day as I needed to take care of myself. She said, I understand you need to do what's best for you, but you need to understand that I need to do what's best for the team. So yeah, everything I normally managed basically went to crap in my absence as the other people on the team weren't qualified to do the work and kept taking time off leading up to my due date instead of learning the basics while I was still there to teach them. I left detailed procedure notes and workflow list, but later found out Ronnie had to pick up all the extra work and a lot of it never got done since she didn't have time. But it was best for the team, right, boss? This is just compliance. I gotta say, I love stories like this where they just comply. She said go talk to HR. So you did? And then you find out it's malicious because everything falls apart while you're gone, and Ronnie has to do all the extra work. That, in the long run, made it malicious, but you didn't know that this was going to happen when you went to HR. You didn't know that they'd basically say to you, you can have leave, you don't have to do anything, and you'll still get paid. And it just comes crashing down on Ronnie, who was like, no, you have to be here. Obviously, she does have to be there because everything fell apart, but now it's in your hands. Too bad, so sad. Our stories for today has come to a close. Until we meet again, have a splendid day.